The summer of 2020 brought America to the brink of collapse. Our country was on fire. Violent anarchy consumed our cities. A poisonous anti-American ideology laid siege to our institutions, and Kamala Harris cheered it on. In Minneapolis, the epicenter of the violent revolution, Kamala helped fundraise for the Minnesota Freedom Fund, a far-left activist group dedicated to breaking criminals out of jail. With Kamala's help, the Freedom Fund raised more than $41 million in 2020 alone. It used that money to post bail for rapists, murderers, and other violent criminals, many of whom promptly use their freedom to commit more violent crimes. But Kamala Harris doesn't care. In fact, she's still actively raising money for the Freedom Fund today. Does America really want someone like that in the White House?
Well, joining us now is the executive director of the organization that produced that clip, America 2100, also the former chief of staff to Senator Marco Rubio, and the newly announced chairman of the board of American Compass, that is Mike Needham. Mike, thanks so much for joining us. That was a heck of a clip from your organization just there. It kind of teases very nicely into my first question for you, which is, looking ahead to this battleground election, we say it's the most important election. It seems like every 4 years. To me, there's a reason for that. Is because every 4 years, it actually is the most important, because by definition, we're getting further and further away from what we were and what we ought to be. So trying to define the stakes of this election and the issues there, how are you viewing this? What is the actual foundational divide at kind of a philosophical level? And then maybe hit one or two key policy issues that you would like to see the Trump campaign emphasize subservient to that philosophical divide.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Josh. I mean, look, this is the most important election. I think in the next 5 years, we will decide whether America continues to be the strongest, most prosperous country in the world, or whether we give that up, whether we make policy choices that choose to sacrifice our ability to lead. Kamala Harris is really scary. I mean, she is the most radically progressive leftist who has ever been the nominee of a major political party. In the video that we just put together there, we showed what she was doing during the summer of 2020 as America was being burned. But it goes beyond that. This is a woman, when she ran for president, said that she thinks that crossing the border should be decriminalized. It's not that she's incompetent, as the borders are. It's that she doesn't believe our country should have borders. This is a woman who believes we should have Medicare for all, not just all Americans, but including illegal immigrants, which is going to bankrupt programs that are important for our country. And so this is the choice, whether you want to have Donald Trump, who's somebody who's shown he's going to fight for America. He's going to fight for an American economy that can make things, that has an industrial base, or whether you want the most radically liberal progressive in the history of our country to sit in the Oval Office.
Yeah, and she was infamously ranked the most liberal senator in that entire body. She was actually ranked by NBC News last summer as the single least popular vice president in the history of the country. Mike, I think that I was somewhat of a minority voice on this. I actually openly speculate that I thought Democrats would have been better off sticking with Joe Biden, trying to limp across the finish line, rather than to go with this horrible, terrible senator from California. But, the fight actually is here. What are they thinking with this? Are they trying to put in play the Sun Belt states at the expense of the Rust Belt? I mean, it's not like Kamala Harris is going to play particularly well in places like Kenosha, Wisconsin, and, places like Grand Rapids, Michigan, especially with J.D. Vance on the ticket. So I'm just not entirely sure what the actual political calculus here. I'd be curious for your thoughts.
Well, I think they think the media can carry her across the finish line. I mean, they clearly decided that Joe Biden was a corpse, that he wasn't capable of making the argument. We all saw that in the debate. And so for the first time in my life, I've never seen anything like it. The entire media infrastructure shifted its guns from the Republican candidate to Joe Biden. For 3 weeks, they were doing everything they could to get him out of the race. They were successful. And you are now seeing the most unbelievable carrying of water by the press for this lady. They say she wasn't the border czar. We all lived through that. The Axios, who said that, wrote articles about her as the border czar. She's somebody who has been a radical progressive. They're now trying to make her out to be some historic moderate. And so I think they're counting that the full, everything that the media has is going to be enough to carry this not particularly talented politician and far leftist radical into the White House. And that they have a better chance doing it with her than they did with Joe Biden.
What's your prediction for her VP candidate? So it seems like now the three finalists, I mean, from what I can tell, are Mark Kelly in Arizona, Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania, and Tim Walz in Minnesota seems to be gaining a lot of steam. What's your prediction?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how much it matters. I think that if you look at it historically, the VP nominee is announced either in the president's home state or the VP's home state. They say they're going to announce it next Tuesday in Philadelphia. So I believe it's going to be Josh Shapiro. They're going to pretend he's a moderate. I don't think that the advocacy he's done for men playing in women's sports, I don't think the advocacy or the tens of millions of dollars the state of Pennsylvania pays to do gender transition surgeries are particularly moderate positions. But it doesn't matter because the VP is the one who's buying into the policy platform of the presidential candidate. It's not the other way around. Whoever comes on that ticket is going to be somebody who is buying in to Kamala Harris's extraordinarily radical leftist view of what America should be.
So you mentioned earlier something that I want to touch back on. You mentioned the imperative to reshore manufacturing jobs. And as I alluded to at the outset, you're the new chairman of the board of American Compass. We actually have Oren Cass on the program today as well. So we're really stacking the tech with American Compass folks. Why don't you talk about the divide in economic visions and political economy between the Trump-Vance ticket versus the Kamala / whoever she picks ticket? What is the divide on economics?
Well, and this is something that historically actually has not been as big of a divide between the Republican Party and the Democrat Party as I think it is today. Historically, for the last 30 years, we've been a country that thinks that we are an economy that has citizens attached to it, as opposed to citizens of a proud nation that happen to have an economy. And so the result of that has been that we have outsourced jobs. We've brought in millions of illegal immigrants to take American jobs. And we have kind of consistently taken the industrial base of this country and shipped it overseas and allowed our country to be a country that basically has Uber Eats and McKinsey and stuff like that. That's not going to work out well for America in the long run. Fundamentally, you have to have an economy that makes things, an economy that provides jobs and dignity and wages to its citizens. And a country that's capable of exporting things to other countries, but exporting stuff that we make, not exporting IOUs so that we can buy stuff from China that they make. We saw during COVID what happens when you don't have an industrial base. We don't want to be begging the Chinese for pharmaceuticals, but we don't want to be begging the Chinese for semiconductors or rare earth minerals. And so we have to have an industrial base in this country. Neoliberals in both parties for a long time thought that doesn't matter. We'd just get some cheap stuff from China and everyone would be happy. But we're seeing that that's not going to work. And nobody is doing more important work than American Compass in making that case that America is a proud country that has an economy that needs to work for us. We're not an economy that the citizens of this country should just work for.
Yeah, I'm actually a huge country music fan. There's an old Toby Keith song where he famously says, pay a little more for the shirt in the store that has a tag on the back that says made in the USA. And, part of that maybe is kind of your civic duty, patriotism, but part of it is what you just said, which is that it's actually important, and we've learned this the hard way with things like COVID. It's actually important to make stuff. I mean, good old common sense could have said that a lot better than a lot of economics PhDs said. Unfortunately, America is relearning it the hard way. I do think the J.D. Vance pick is an extraordinarily auspicious start in trying to kind of realign the Republican Party in that mold. One other question for you, though, Mike, and I say this as someone who's known J.D. personally for years. I was a huge proponent of his being the vice president, and I'm over the moon happy for him. The favorable, unfavorable splits right now are not exactly where they should be. I'm curious what your take is on that and what the ticket has to do to try to make sure that the public actually sees the J.D. Vance that I have gotten to know, which is an incredible American patriot, a veteran, a father, and a public-minded citizen and so forth.
Yeah, I think that will come through. Look, this is a lot of noise right now. The media has done everything it can to tear down J.D. I think if you look at that Minnesota speech he gave a couple days ago, he did a great job. He did a great job yesterday on the stump. People will get to know the J.D. Vance that that I know. There's a bunch of people on Twitter right now who are creating memes and a bunch of nonsense, but it's noise. And I'm quite confident that as J.D. is living in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, and Wisconsin, in that critical Rust Belt, those three critical Rust Belt states, he's going to be a tremendous asset for the ticket. And more importantly, when it becomes time to govern, there's nobody who's thought in a more kind of deep and systematic way about the challenges that our country faces. And JD is just going to be a tremendous asset for conservatives on the inside, both in terms of personnel and then the policy fights that will develop in the administration.